The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that hides secrets. He watched from the shadows as the woman he trusted moved through their home with another man. Every glance, every gesture, every touch said what words couldn't. She had been betraying him for months. He didn't yell. He didn't confront her. He didn't break anything. He waited. Days passed. Nights passed. She carried on, thinking he didn't see, thinking he didn't know. When the moment came, he didn't need to raise his voice. He revealed the truth calmly, deliberately. And suddenly, everyone she had deceived realized what she had done. Her world crumbled, quietly, irreversibly. And he walked away. Not broken. Not defeated, untouchable. What kind of man watches betrayal unfold and turns it into victory? How far would you go to reclaim everything someone stole from you? He had been lying to himself long before the lie showed its face. It started as irritation, the kind that had no clear source but stayed with him through the day, sitting behind his eyes and tightening his jaw when he least expected it. He noticed it when she answered his calls later than usual, when her voice sounded distracted, when she rushed through conversations that once felt easy and unforced. Each time it happened, he told himself there was a reasonable explanation, because marriage demanded reason, patience, and restraint, and he had built his life around being a man who did not jump to conclusions. But the feeling did not leave. That evening, when he walked into the house and called her name, his voice echoed back at him without an answer. The lights were off even though her car had been in the driveway earlier, and the quiet felt heavier than normal, pressing against him in a way that made him stop just inside the doorway. He stood there longer than he needed to, listening, waiting for any sound that would confirm she was home or explain her absence. And when nothing came, something inside him tightened with a slow, uncomfortable certainty. He set his keys down harder than usual and moved through the living room, noticing details he normally ignored, like the way her shoes were missing from their usual place and how the air smelled, faintly of her perfume, fresher than it should have been at that hour. These were small things, insignificant on their own, but together they formed a pattern his mind resisted naming. He remembered the security cameras then, not because he suspected her, but because suspicion was starting to demand answers, and answers were easier to face than uncertainty. The cameras had been installed for safety, after a break-in scare that left the neighborhood shaken, and until that moment he had barely used them. They were meant to protect the house, not expose it. He sat down on the couch and opened the app on his phone, telling himself he would only check to see when she came home, that he would laugh later about how paranoid he had become. His thumb hovered over the screen for a moment, hesitating, because part of him already sensed that once he looked, there would be no way to unsee what the cameras had captured. The footage loaded slowly, and impatience flared into irritation as he dragged the timeline back, searching for a moment that would make sense of the evening. The living room appeared on the screen, empty at first, sunlight stretching across the floor earlier that day. The room calm and ordinary, and for a brief second, relief washed through him because normal still felt possible. Then the front door opened. She stepped inside, laughing softly. Her body relaxed in a way he had not seen in months. That laugh hit him harder than any physical blow because it was effortless, unguarded, and completely absent when she spoke to him lately. He leaned forward without realizing it, his focus narrowing as he watched her move through the space they shared. A man followed her in. Not a stranger who looked unsure or rushed, but someone comfortable enough to close the door behind him without looking around, without hesitation, without fear of being caught. The man reached for her immediately, and she did not pull away, did not hesitate, did not look like someone doing something wrong for the first time. His chest tightened and he felt heat rise into his face. Not explosive anger, but a deep, suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. He stared at the screen, his eyes refusing to blink, his mind scrambling for explanations that collapsed the moment they formed. This was not a mistake. This was not confusion. This was familiarity. He watched as they stood close, their movements slow and deliberate, and the cruelty of it settled in fully when he realized they were not hiding. They were not rushing. They were behaving like people who believed they owned the moment, like people who had done this before and expected to do it again. His hand shook as he set the phone down, and for the first time in years, he felt his body react before his thoughts could catch up. His stomach turned, his throat tightened, and his eyes burned with a mix of disbelief and humiliation that made him press his palms against his face, as if that could push the reality away. But reality did not move. He picked the phone back up and watched again, forcing himself to see every detail because denial had cost him enough already. He noticed how she leaned into the man, how her posture softened, how natural it all looked, and something inside him broke quietly, without drama, without sound. This was not a moment that ended in shouting or confrontation. It was the moment he understood that the woman he loved had been living a life he was not part of, and that whatever came next would change them both forever. He did not sleep that night, not because his eyes refused to close, but because every time they did, his mind dragged him back into the living room he had just watched collapse on his phone screen. The bed felt unfamiliar beside him, too wide and empty even though her pillow was still there, holding the faint warmth and scent of her hair. He lay on his back staring at the ceiling, counting breaths, listening to the slow rhythm of the house as if it were alive and watching him in return. Sometime after midnight he heard the front door open. The sound was quiet, careful, the sound of someone who did not want to wake another person. He stayed exactly where he was, his body tense but unmoving, his eyes fixed on the darkness above him as footsteps moved through the house below. He recognized the pace of her walk immediately, the way she always kicked her shoes off near the door instead of carrying them, the soft clink as her keys landed on the counter. Each familiar sound felt like a personal insult now, because familiarity implied honesty, and honesty was gone. She came upstairs slowly, and he could tell she was tired, the kind of tired that came from emotional exertion rather than work. When she entered the bedroom, she paused for a moment, and he felt her presence settle into the room like weight on his chest. He kept his breathing steady, pretending to sleep, because confronting her without preparation felt dangerous in a way he could not yet explain. She changed clothes quietly, sliding into bed beside him with practiced care, and when she turned her back toward him, something inside him hardened. That simple motion, that instinctive distance, confirmed what the footage already had. He did not reach for her. He did not move closer. He stayed still, letting the silence stretch between them until it became thick enough to suffocate. Morning arrived without relief. Sunlight crept through the curtains, and with it came the ordinary demands of life that did not pause for betrayal. He got up before she did, showered, dressed, and stood in front of the mirror longer than necessary, studying his own face as if looking for signs of weakness or foolishness he might have missed. His reflection looked the same, tired but composed, and that steadiness surprised him because inside everything felt unstable. Downstairs he made coffee and sat at the table, listening as she eventually came down, greeting him with a casual good morning that landed like an accusation. He watched her closely as she moved around the kitchen, noting how natural she seemed, how easily she slipped into the role of wife, pouring coffee, checking her phone, asking if he wanted breakfast. He answered politely, evenly, his voice controlled because control felt like the only thing he still owned. She talked about her plans for the day, about errands and work, about things that mattered, only because they helped her avoid talking about anything else. He listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving her face, and for a moment he wondered how long she had been practicing this version of herself, how long she had been balancing two lives without letting either collapse. When she left the house, he waited until her car disappeared down the street before he moved. He returned to the couch and opened the camera app again, this time not out of shock but out of intention. He went through the footage carefully, methodically, watching days rewind themselves with cruel precision. He saw patterns emerge where before there had only been excuses, saw times she claimed to be elsewhere, saw the same man appear again and again, always confident, always comfortable. Each clip stripped away another layer of illusion. This was not a brief lapse. This was a routine. He felt anger then, sharp and focused, but he did not let it control him. Instead, it sharpened his attention, turning his grief into something deliberate. He saved the files, organized them, backed them up, and labeled them with dates and times, treating the evidence with the same seriousness he would have given any important document. Later that afternoon, she called him. Her voice was light, affectionate, asking how his day was going, and the ease with which she spoke made his jaw tighten. He answered calmly, matching her tone, and when she said she would be home late, he felt a strange sense of clarity settle over him. There was no argument, no questioning, no plea for explanation, just confirmation. That evening, when she finally returned, he was waiting. Not pacing, not drinking, not rehearsing accusations. But sitting quietly at the table, the house tidy, the lights warm and ordinary, she noticed immediately that something was different, and he saw it in the way she slowed, in the way her eyes searched his face for clues. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," he said, and the truth of that answer surprised them both. They ate dinner together, speaking little, and the silence between them felt heavier now, charged with unspoken knowledge. He watched her eat, watched her avoid his eyes, watched guilt flicker across her face before being replaced by composure. After dinner, he stood and cleared the table without asking for help, and when she reached out to touch his arm, he stepped away gently but firmly. The rejection was subtle, but it landed hard, and he saw confusion flash across her face. That night when they lay in bed again, he did not turn toward her or away from her. He lay flat on his back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the calm settle deeper into him, the kind of calm that came not from peace but from decision. He was done wondering. He was done hoping. Whatever came next would be intentional. The next few days unfolded with a strange precision, as though time itself had agreed to slow down and allow him to observe every detail without distraction. He went to work, attended meetings, answered emails, and spoke when spoken to, but everything felt distant, like he was moving through a version of his life that no longer belonged to him. His attention drifted often, pulled back to the image of her standing in the living room with another man, to the calmness in her body that suggested comfort rather than regret, and each time the memory surfaced, he felt less pain and more resolve. Resolve was quieter than anger, but far more dangerous. He stopped asking her questions altogether, not because he was afraid of the answers, but because questions gave people room to lie, and he had reached a point where lies no longer held power over him. Instead, he observed. He watched the way she timed her departures, how she dressed more carefully on certain days, how she carried herself with a confidence that did not come from within their marriage. He noticed how she touched him less, how intimacy had become something she postponed rather than shared, and how she grew restless when he stayed home unexpectedly. At night, when she slept beside him, he lay awake listening to her breathing, steady and unconcerned, and he wondered how someone could betray another person so completely and still rest so easily. The thought did not make him furious anymore. It made him curious in a way that felt cold and unsettling, because curiosity meant he was no longer emotionally reacting, he was studying. One evening, she came home later than usual, her expression already prepared, her apology rehearsed before he had a chance to ask anything. He listened without interruption, nodding slightly as she spoke about work delays and unexpected responsibilities, and when she finished, he told her it was fine. The relief that crossed her face was immediate and revealing, and he realized then how much of their relationship had become dependent on his silence. That realization stayed with him. Later that night, after she fell asleep, he got out of bed and went to the living room, sitting in the same spot where he had first watched the footage. He opened his laptop and began to plan, not impulsively, not emotionally, but with the steady patience of someone who understood that careless moves could ruin everything. He reviewed the footage again, not to relive the pain, but to understand the scope of what had been taken from him. Trust, dignity, time, and choice had all been stolen quietly over weeks and months, and the weight of that theft demanded something more deliberate than confrontation. He researched quietly, learning what exposure meant, what silence meant, what timing meant. He learned how truth behaved when released at the right moment, how it could move through social circles, workplaces, and families without needing to be shouted. The idea of revenge shifted in his mind, shedding the image of anger and replacing it with something far more restrained and irreversible. He was not interested in humiliation for its own sake. He wanted balance. The next morning, he called in sick to work and stayed home alone, walking through the house as though seeing it for the first time. Every room held memories that now felt unstable, moments that had once seemed genuine but were now cast in doubt. He stood in the bedroom doorway and realized how carefully she had compartmentalized her life, how easily she had shared space without sharing truth. That understanding hardened his resolve further, because betrayal was not an accident. It was a series of choices made repeatedly. When she returned home that evening, she noticed his stillness, the way he no longer sought reassurance or explanation. She asked him if something was wrong, her voice cautious, and he met her eyes fully for the first time in days. There was no anger in his expression, no accusation, just a calm attention that made her shift uncomfortably. "I'm just thinking," he said. "About what?" she asked. "About us," he replied, and left it at that. The silence that followed unsettled her more than shouting ever could have. He could see it in the way she fidgeted, in the way her confidence faltered slightly, and he understood then that control had begun to change hands. She did not know what he knew, but she sensed distance growing, and distance was something she could not manipulate easily. That night he slept better than he had since discovering the truth. Not because he had found peace, but because he had found direction. Direction brought clarity, and clarity dulled the pain enough for him to think clearly. He understood that confrontation would give her the chance to rewrite the story, to cry, to apologize, to plead, to become the victim of her own actions. He refused to give her that opportunity. Instead, he waited. Waiting was not passive. It was active, intentional, and exhausting in its own way, but it allowed him to regain something essential that had been taken from him. Without his consent, control over the narrative, control over his response, control over what would come next. As he lay there in the dark, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, he accepted something quietly and without self-pity. The marriage he thought he had was already over. What remained was a decision about how the truth would enter the world, and who would be standing when it did. He did not rush the next step, because rushing belonged to people who were afraid of losing control, and he was no longer afraid. The days that followed settled into a careful rhythm, one built on observation rather than reaction, and the calm he carried unsettled her in ways she did not yet understand. Calm, when it arrived after distance, felt like a warning. He began changing small things first, things she would notice but not immediately question. He stopped answering her calls right away, letting them ring longer than usual, sometimes returning them hours later with brief explanations that mirrored the excuses she had used on him. He stayed out late without announcing his plans, coming home tired but emotionally closed, offering no details and asking for none. When she tried to re-establish intimacy through casual touches or forced warmth, he responded politely but without engagement, creating a space she could not cross no matter how familiar she felt entitled to be. The shift disturbed her. She started watching him the way he had once watched her, studying his movements, his expressions, his silences. She asked more questions not because she wanted answers, but because uncertainty made her nervous. He gave her nothing that could be held on to, nothing that could be twisted into reassurance. His restraint became confrontational in its own quiet way, and she felt it even when he said nothing at all. One evening, she confronted him in the kitchen, her voice tight with frustration she could no longer disguise. She asked him why he seemed so distant, why he no longer talked to her the way he used to, why everything felt cold between them. He listened patiently, letting her finish, watching her emotions rise and fall as she spoke. And when she finally stopped, waiting for his response, he met her gaze without hesitation. "I'm just seeing things more clearly," he said. The words were simple, but they landed hard. He saw it in the way her posture stiffened, in the way her confidence wavered for just a moment before she recovered, she slicing vegetables with more force than necessary, her movements sharp and defensive, and he understood then that she sensed something slipping away from her, even if she did not yet know what it was. That night he took a step she could not see. He sent a single message, carefully written, to a person she trusted deeply, someone whose opinion mattered to her more than she admitted. He did not accuse. He did not insult. He simply asked a question, one grounded in concern rather than suspicion, and attached, nothing more than a suggestion, that there might be things worth discussing soon. The message was vague, but its intent was deliberate, and once it was sent, he felt no relief, only certainty. The next day, her phone rang more often than usual. She grew distracted, stepping out of rooms to take calls, lowering her voice, glancing at him afterward as though measuring whether he had noticed. He noticed everything. He noticed the tension settling into her shoulders, the way her confidence fractured, under the weight of being watched by someone other than him. The safety she had built around her secret was beginning to weaken, not through confrontation, but through exposure to possibility. Later that week, he made another quiet move. He arranged to be absent on a day she believed was safe, leaving the house early and returning unexpectedly. He did not intend to catch her in the act again. That was no longer necessary. What he wanted was to see how she behaved when she believed she was unseen. to measure how deeply the deception had shaped her habits. When he pulled into the driveway and noticed another car already parked there, something steady and unshaken settled into him. He did not enter the house right away. He sat in the car, breathing slowly, allowing the moment to pass without interference. He opened the camera app, not with dread but with confirmation, and watched the truth unfold with a clarity that left no room for doubt. When he finally walked inside, the house was quiet again, too quiet, and she emerged moments later, startled but composed, her explanation forming before he asked anything at all. He listened, he nodded. He accepted her words without resistance. That acceptance confused her more than anger ever could have. In the days that followed, he began preparing for separation without announcing it. He gathered documents quietly, organized accounts, and removed himself from shared vulnerabilities one careful step at a time. He spoke to people she assumed were firmly in her corner, not with accusations, but with facts presented calmly and without emotion. He let the truth speak for itself, knowing that once released, it would move faster and farther than anything he could control. The tension between them thickened. She became restless, snapping at small things, crying unexpectedly, oscillating between defensiveness and affection, unsure which version of herself would work. He remained consistent, steady, unresponsive to manipulation, and that consistency frightened her. She began to realize that something irreversible was approaching, something she could not talk her way out of. One night she finally asked him directly if he was planning to leave. He looked at her for a long moment before answering, taking in the woman he had once trusted without question, and in that moment he felt neither hatred nor longing, only a deep sense of finality. He told her he was planning to tell the truth, and the color drained from her face as though she finally understood the weight of what silence had been holding back. She tried to speak, but no words came. For the first time since he had discovered the betrayal, he felt the balance shift completely, and he knew the final step would not be quiet. Not because he would raise his voice, but because truth, once fully exposed, never arrived gently. He did not announce the day. He did not make threats. He did not send her a warning that could be ignored. The moment arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a shadow stretching across the floor, and she did not see it coming until it was already too late. He began by calling the people who mattered, the ones whose opinions she had always valued, the ones who would understand context, who would recognize truth when it was presented without embellishment. He spoke calmly, factually, methodically. He shared timelines, names, details, and evidence, letting the footage, the records, and the consistency of her lies speak louder than any accusation he could make with words. There was no yelling, no dramatics, no spectacle. There was only the undeniable truth, laid out like a ledger of betrayal. By the time he returned home, the weight of the silence was different. The house felt smaller, tighter, because now it contained consequences. She noticed immediately that he was no longer waiting, that he had stepped out of the patterns that had allowed her to believe she could manipulate, evade, and control the narrative. Her smile faltered, small cracks appearing in the armor of composure she had relied on for months. You've told them? She whispered, voice trembling. I told the truth, he said simply. The sentence was short, sharp, unyielding, and it carried all the force that years of betrayal could not. She sank into the nearest chair, hands gripping the edges as if holding on to the last threads of stability. Her eyes flicked to him, searching, pleading, bargaining silently, but there was no room left for negotiation. The calm in his demeanor was terrifying, because it signaled something far worse than anger. Certainty. Over the next few hours, messages arrived. Calls, inquiries, confirmations, people checking details, verifying events, connecting dots. He observed from a distance his presence in the house like a quiet storm, one that had been building patiently and now moved with precision. She could feel it pressing against her, the realization that every lie, every betrayal, every moment she had thought hidden had been recorded and catalogued, ready to stand against her. The confrontation she had once feared, the explosive scene she might have imagined, never came. Instead, she watched quietly as her reputation, carefully constructed lies, and half-truths began to unravel naturally, uncontrollably under the weight of factual evidence. Friends, colleagues, and even distant family members began to treat her differently, not out of cruelty, but out of awareness. She sensed the shift in their tone, the subtle distance, the quiet judgment that could not be ignored. He remained present but detached, a silent observer to the chaos that had once been hidden behind closed doors. The man she had been seeing was gone, confronted by his own recognition of consequences that would not leave her unaffected. There were no dramatic showdowns, no physical confrontations, only the slow, undeniable erosion of the life she had believed was secure. When she finally turned to him, desperation evident in every feature, he did not respond with anger or rage. He simply stated what had already been determined by facts. "It's over," he said. The words were measured, final, leaving no room for negotiation or appeal. She broke then, not in a dramatic fit, but in quiet, controlled crumbling. The mask slipped, and beneath it lay the woman who had believed she could outrun accountability, now confronted by the reality that every choice has a cost. He watched without gloating, without triumph, because this was not about revenge in the ordinary sense. This was about restoration. Restoration of his dignity, his peace, and the boundaries that she had so carelessly crossed. He gathered his things the next morning, packing not just physical items but emotional detachment, leaving behind only memories and the evidence of lessons learned. The house, once a shared space of trust and comfort, now held only traces of what had been and the silence that followed reckoning. As he stepped out the door, he paused once, looking back, not with anger, not with longing, but with clarity. He understood that betrayal leaves scars, but it does not have to define the future. Truth, once unveiled, has a power that rage cannot match, and consequences, when delivered patiently and deliberately, are far more lasting than any impulsive act of revenge. She remained inside, staring at the empty doorway, realizing for the first time that control had never been hers, and that the man she had betrayed had finally reclaimed what she had taken, his life, his peace, and the last word. And for him, that was enough.